We had to, by the criteria, pull from existing plans, as Dr. Scott mentioned. You couldn't just make something up. It had to either be in your comprehensive transportation plan or one of the livable centers initiative plans or in the current transportation improvement plan or regional transportation plan. And so our transportation staff from all these various plans called a preliminary list of several $100 million of potential roadway and bike and pedestrian types of projects that we knew the community had lobbied for in the past, but there wasn't money for. We then went over that list with the CEO, the Board of Commissioners, at some of their committee meetings, went through the lists. We had 4 community meetings around the county and in north, south, east, and west. Several hundred people came to those meetings and gave us some input. And between our transportation staff and the community, they reinforced that several $100 million of potential projects as a good list. Then we submitted it to the roundtable process. And then, of course, there were $22 billion of proposals from the 10 counties and $6 billion to allocate. And so back and forth, month after month through that roundtable process, the list had to be whittled down. And I think from our policy leaders, it was clear that DeKalb wanted a majority transit approach for the reasons Dr. Samala mentioned, that it has economic development importance, it has air quality environmental importance, and it fits what our comprehensive plan and our Livable Centers Initiative plans has said is what DeKalb wants to look like in the future, that we have these core centers of development in Decatur or at Stonecrest or up around the perimeter or in Main Street Tucker. All throughout the community there are probably a dozen of these kind of core centers that were meant to be economic development focus areas and opportunities for those more walkable, pedestrian safe, bicycle friendly kind of future environments that also help save on fuel and in the new economy we're in. And so back and forth as this process went, at the end of the day, we ended up in DeKalb with about $1.3 billion out of that $6.1 billion list. So it's a pretty healthy percentage out of 10 counties that's on our list. $925 million for those 2 major transit projects, those initiatives Dr. Scott talked about. $593 million among the region for MARTA State of Good Repair. So that the current system we've spent all that money over the years investing in doesn't keep crumbling, but that we refresh it. And a good portion of that would be spent in DeKalb, probably at least $300 million or so of that 593. Then we also, on top of that, and it didn't get as much attention while the big transit issues were legitimately being focused on, we ended up with $142 million of corridor-type improvements that we tried to keep balanced around the community. Glenwood Avenue, which is a focus for safety, and up in Dunwoody, there's a project on Mount Vernon. There's a project to continue pedestrian safety on Buford Highway, and on Indian Creek near Clarkston, and on Rockbridge Road, and on the Clifton Corridor on Emory Campus with their bridge and the multimodal facility. In the North Druid Hills and I-85 corridor, where there's a lot of economic development potential still occurring. And then our major capacity project on Panola Road, where from Covington Highway eventually to Browns Mill, there's a proposal to enhance capacity. So we tried to keep it balanced, knowing that we were going to have less roadway money in order to get the big transit investments in the community. We also tried to maintain $48 million within DeKalb cities. There's that Mount Vernon project in Dunwoody. There's a new connector road proposed in Doraville that would help with the GM redevelopment. There's some walkable and safe community work in Decatur and Avondale Estates on College Avenue. None of the projects got as much money as would be ideal to do 100%, but they each got something so that we could try to have as balanced a picture as we could, knowing that DeKalb is not going to get all $22 billion that was originally on the table, or whatever our share was. And then the final piece, there's some interstate investment at I-20 in Panola and on I-85 north of 285 that would have some federal funds matched. And so at the end of the day, we couldn't have everything we wanted. We could not, a lot of very good projects got left unfunded, but at least I think given that 10 county process, we got as much as we could get out of that. And should it get approved, we've got some big investments we can make. Then the final piece I'd mention is the 15% local distribution doesn't get talked about maybe as much either. Right now, DeKalb has, out of our 2,200 miles of county-maintained roads, 400 miles that need resurfacing. Every year we get the state and local funding necessary to do about 40 miles of roads. Now you can see 40 out of 2,200, you don't make a very big dent, and the backlog keeps growing. Should the 15% of local redistribution, a good portion of that, be allocated to resurfacing work, we could begin to make a dent in some of that. That 400-mile backlog would cost you about $120 million today to address. Some of the $12 million a year we would get from that 15% could help make a dent in that. And the final piece I'd mention is we also have about 185-mile sidewalk gap on our major arterial and collector streets. Much of DeKalb that was built in the 60s, 70s, 80s were before the codes required sidewalks. And so 185 miles of our major streets don't have a sidewalk on either side. And we've made some closing in that gap with the host program, with the transportation bond we did in 2006. But now that sidewalk money's been exhausted. And so as the CEO and the board have been discussing this program over the last year, they've talked about the fact that from that 15%, we could make a dent in the resurfacing backlog, we could make a dent in some of the sidewalk gaps, or address some of these other priority transportation needs.